I just want to go through a couple of examples quickly. Maybe as a preface, just to say that trying to explain complicated financial business is a running battle that I think we will always struggle with. I pay close attention to how other journalists do it, authors, television journalists, prosecutors, investigators, forensic accountants, and I read their reports and try and understand how they tell their stories. Also, short sellers. They also put together investigative reports on companies and their accounting practices. And I would say everyone's falling quite short of all of us are falling short of telling stories of complicated financial shenanigans. And that's okay. It's kind of meant to be like that. Nobody launders money around the world, splitting the money into hundreds of little pieces and bringing it back together in shell companies with the ownership hidden behind all sorts of complicated mechanisms because they want it to be easy when somebody starts asking questions. That these things are designed so that when somebody presents it to a court of law or maybe to the public through journalism, that there are so many little bits and pieces, and there is so much doubt created, and there's so much plausible deniability thrown in that it becomes very hard to convince people um, of what you've discovered, even if you're right. Um, anyway, by way of example, here is an investigation that I did with some colleagues around Africa and the UK. Um, we decided to pick on MTN. It's Africa's biggest mobile network, but it's based in South Africa. It's one of South Africa's success stories. Um, we were intrigued because almost all of their international operations were held through a Mauritius company, which I didn't put it in there, but it's a shell company. It's got no business, it's got no office, it's got no people. It's just a registration at a corporate services firm. And we just went on a fishing expedition to try and understand this and to try and understand how they what they do with their profits that they make in Africa and the Middle East, where they make a lot of profit. And long story short, we were able to identify a certain sort of class of financial flow. They called them management fees that they were paying to this Mauritius company. And they clearly placed a lot of emphasis on these management fees as a way of repatriating money for investors or for shareholders, which is immediately a red flag, because if it's a management fee, it should be defined something like we're paying money to our parent company because our parent company is providing us with services. They are helping to manage our company. They've got centralized functions. Yet in their reports to shareholders, they talk about management fees as repatriating the money for shareholders. There's already a divergence there. There's already a lie that's beginning to be exposed. So we honed in as much as we can. But just to digress, there's our new president. He was the chairman of MTN at the time. He became our president yesterday, but at the time that we were writing this story, he stood up in Parliament, faced with pressure from opposition parties wanting to know what the government was doing about illicit financial flows and tax avoidance and profit shifting. And he stood up and he explained how bad it is that even though it might be illegal, companies that are moving their profits to shell companies that do no business somewhere offshore, that's totally wrong, and the government was going to crack down on it. So we put him on the front page of the newspaper because we thought that spoke to the backbone, basically, of this man who was in the running to become our president. But this was quite a dry story, and it was really difficult to explain because we had very, very limited information. We had little bits and pieces and clues that we could pull together from audited financial statements and from company reports. Here was one of the first clues where the MTN Nigeria segment, they disclosed in a narrative that they'd had to stop these management fees, 1.7 billion rands of management fees, and they wouldn't say why. Well, they didn't say why. They just said we had to stop this. But anyway, so that was a red flag. Then we picked up some judgments from the tax courts. Tax courts are usually secret, but there was just some basic signals here that there was something wrong with these management fees. Some deep web searching pulled up some other clues. This was I think it was a presentation to students. No, I think it was a presentation to the tax community by MTN's very own tax planner, where they'd used MTN as a case study in how tax authorities go after companies and pursue. In this case, the Uganda Revenue Authority was chasing after MTN. Again, he started to put some meat onto the financial flows that we were seeing and the problems that we thought we were seeing, but were battling to explain. Whilst he was defending MTN, he was also helping to explain what we were battling to explain. One of my colleagues, I think this was in Ghana, managed to pull some intelligence reports that they'd done on MTN in Ghana, focusing again on these management fees. And then shortly before publication, I was trying a few different Google search methods, and I managed to quite mistakenly hack into a website for a university in the States where they teach tax affairs, and it seemed like the same tax planner who had helped me earlier had uploaded all of these the Uganda Revenue Authority's correspondence with MTN about its management fees, and that really helped because the Uganda Revenue Authority went into quite a lot of depth about why it didn't believe that this money that MTN was sending from Africa to Mauritius was real, was for a real commercial purpose. I didn't state the problem with this, and that is that MTN is moving their income from African countries to Mauritius. It is tax deductible MTN's treating it as tax deductible in the African countries, and so this money is taken away from the revenue collector in those countries, and quite obviously those countries are devastatingly poor, and they rely on foreign investment and companies operating there to pay their taxes to help support the economy and the infrastructure that those countries use. So my point is that it's designed to be complicated. I don't think any of these tax affairs have been wrapped up. MTN's clearly fighting with the Uganda, Nigerian, and Ghana governments over these transactions. But when a revenue collector is as well-resourced and as smart as the Ugandans apparently were, they pick up on the scheme, they challenge MTN, and MTN's got all its arguments lined up. People talk about the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, the one being legal and the other being illegal. I think quite often, the companies and tax planners will push the line between the two and stay within the arguable zone. Frankly, it's not a line between the two; it's a gray zone between the two, and they'll put their tax planning, or the very aggressive tax planners will aim for that gray zone. And when they do get challenged, they throw detail, they throw documents, they obfuscate, they flesh it out in a tax court, and the revenue collectors just do not have the capacity to tell this complicated story in a way that they can convince the judge, and ultimately they'll either get off scot-free or they'll get off with some sort of a settlement. So it's designed to be complicated. If you're struggling to tell these stories, that's okay. We all are. So are very smart people in revenue collectors and courts and prosecuting authorities and the like. But in this case, we were able to tell the story by pointing out we identified the flows. This is what's happening. We identified the disputes with the various governments, and we were able to provide authoritative voices from the Revenue Authority document. This is not us going out to experts and trying to harvest comments to prop up our narrative. These are independent documents that are out there, and they explain what we think we're seeing. They're supporting our hypothesis. And then there were the unanswered questions. It's one of the I'm learning slowly that it's one of the easier ways to try and unpack these kinds of stories and try and explain them, because you don't always know what's going on, but when you are investigating financial flows, you tend to hone in on commerciality. Is this a commercially rational transaction that's going on over here? Does it make commercial sense? That's not an easy question to unpack, but you might find red flags that suggest that something doesn't make sense here, meaning that they are moving this reason for some purpose that may be illicit or at least unethical, whatever that means. But in any case, we were not able to work out exactly what MTN's scheme was here. Because when they move their profits to Mauritius, we discovered that actually the South African tax authorities and tax acts and trade agreements with Mauritius are quite good. And any profits made at the Mauritius company get booked as tax in South Africa. So what was the scheme? We don't know. MTN couldn't tell us. We engaged with them for months on this question, and they just simply couldn't tell us why they were sending money to Mauritius, marked as management fees, to a company that has no managers, and that money's not coming back to South Africa where the managers are sitting. Something's wrong there, and they couldn't tell us. And just that unanswered question was a very helpful way to tell the story. How do I get out of here? Okay. I'll just skip straight to the Gupta leaks. I had a Panama Papers example, which I'll try go back to. But here's my new friend Piyush Goyal on the right-hand side, the very sweet-looking man in the white garb. He's an Indian businessman, and we came across him in what we call the Gupta leaks in South Africa. So we received a cache of emails and documents basically from a server within a group of companies that in South Africa they're very close to our former president, Jacob Zuma, and we have identified and reported on many quite obviously corrupt deals that these guys were benefiting from. And one of their schemes was because they basically had found a way to control our government, to put it simply. They had the people leading our state-owned companies and our ministries and our presidents in their pocket. And so using that influence, they would force big companies wanting to supply our state with locomotives, cranes, all sorts of contracts with lots of money. If those companies wanted those contracts, they had to pay a kickback to the Guptas, and they at least 5 billion rands worth of this money we found flowing through a little group of shell companies in the United Arab Emirates, mostly led by something called JJ Trading. And we had a good tip-off that Piyush Goyal was behind it. Very well-informed tip-off of the sort that it was difficult to ignore. And this was circumstantially supported in the Gupta leaks. And indeed, we found in the Gupta leaks, where there was a lot of internal accounting information, we were able to trace money flows from JJ Trading and its web of shells into the Gupta accounts, and a lot of it came back to South Africa again. So it was a laundry, big money laundry that had been set up. But it was just difficult for us to prove that Piyush Goyal and his scrap metal network called World's Window was behind it. He flatly denied it. So he'd built in his plausible deniability. There are no corporate records available. I'm sure if we were able to get the share register, we would find it's not going to be owned in name by him. But yeah, we were. What I like to do, here's how for myself and to share the information with experts and to share it with colleagues, I just map out the circumstantial chain of control or influence that we found in the Gupta leaks through emails and so on. I won't go into the details. Just suffice to say that a pen and a paper, or maybe a digital program like this, just to map out these complicated things. You can see it, you can understand it, but it's really damn hard to explain it to people, and it's also hard for you to remember. So draw it, and then try and explain it to your colleagues. And when you're trying to get an expert to help you to explain the story, you can send it to them, and then you can get them on the phone or in person and say, okay, this is what's going on over here. Here are the details that I haven't put in here. And you might be able to throw some of these diagrams or prettier versions of them, or maybe less complicated versions of them, into your story to help your readers along too. But even if you don't do that, it just helps you to understand the complexity, so that when it comes down to your narrative, you can tell that story. We dug a little bit deeper into World's Window, that's Piyush Goyal's company, and his relationship with the Guptas, and we found many financial flows, transactions that just did not make any sense. Here basically is, I think it's 70 million rand or something, that basically the Guptas sent from themselves to themselves in a very big circle over a week. And they funneled all of it through one of the World's Window companies in South Africa. But they broke it into lots of little pieces, brought it back together, broke it up again, brought it back together, and then we don't know what's going on over here, but it makes no damn sense. And we found many examples like that. And we also found that the Guptas and World's Window had established a Hawala network. I think I'll maybe steer clear of the exact details of this, but we were faced with financial records that we stared at for months. We could see something was going on here. They were pinging money between themselves from World's Window to Gupta companies, like group companies. It was going backwards and forwards. And eventually, through lots of staring and reading up of financial academic reports and so on a certain system of money remittance that's often used for money laundering, and that's Hawala, we realized that that's exactly what the Guptas and World's Window were doing. And we found that the kickbacks on the South African contracts were sometimes flowing through this network. Here, I can't remember if I put this or a version of this in my story, but this was at least for my benefit, for my colleagues' benefit, for me to try and communicate with the experts that we were talking to try and tease out what it all meant. Okay. I'll just skip on to broad points. Wait, let me just pull up the Panama Papers one. Just picture. A group of South Africans entered a business relationship with a fellow called Dan Gertler. He was very close to the DRC president Joseph Kabila, and he basically stole a lot of money from the Congo through a bunch of very dodgy mining deals. But we had one mystery which we were able to solve through the Panama Papers, where we had basically our president's nephew, our president's lawyer, and friends of another politician were sort of circumstantially involved in this dodgy oil deal, but we could never quite work out what was going on. And in the Panama Papers, we were able to pull out lots of emails and records and dovetail them all together, and we were able to work out that we had been lied to a few years ago about who the real owners or intended owners were of this thing. And that was a story that basically just could have been told by that diagram. We could have said, remember that story we wrote a few years ago? Well, here's what's going on. Anyway, when you're writing these things, just recognize it is complicated. It's fine. Pay attention to how others do it. Read, hungrily consume other reports by forensic investigators, by short sellers, by other journalists, by prosecutors. How do they explain it to the court? What do the judges understand, or juries, whatever it is? Just look at where they succeed and where they fail. See how the way those stories are explained might help your story that you're trying to unpack. Every story is different. Every sort of set of financial flows is different. Your readers or your audience might be different. It might be a jury. It might be a judge. It might be It might be your readers if you're a journalist, whatever. You have to tailor how you tell the story. And if you can compare case studies, you'll find lots of lessons that you can pull together. Um, it's very important to know the point that you're trying to make. Clear thinking is clear writing, they like to say. So you need to understand it first. Don't just start hitting words out onto the page if you're a writer like I tend to be. Also, learn what conclusions you cannot draw from the evidence, because there is a degree of interpretation that's going on over here. You say that this happens, that happens, it makes no commercial sense, the possible explanations are X, Y, and Z, or we don't know, or whatever. Like, but be careful about what the evidence does not tell you, and if you can simply leave an unanswered question and present that to your readers, say, that helps to tell the story that there's something wrong here, even if you don't have the perfect answer. Remember, it's very difficult for even the most clever people to really understand what's going on with these things. When you're writing, or however you tell your story, do recognize that there is a cost for every point of evidence that you add to your story. Every little point of evidence adds another level of complexity. Every character that you add to your story adds more complexity. You should really try, and I very often fail at this, but try and go for a more minimalist approach. Cut out the extraneous detail. You might have done a line of investigation that's fascinating. It says something that's important, but it doesn't really say what you're trying to say in the story. Cut it. Leave it on the editing room floor. Try and get the story behind the desktop analysis. It's one thing to sit there and analyze documents, invoices, and so on. But again, if you were to compare yourself to a prosecution trying to make a case of corruption, it's no good for them to appear before the court with a handful of documents and say, this is what we think's happening. Because it's too complicated. There's too many alternative explanations that are not known. So you need the people. You need to get to the people behind the story. And if you're a prosecutor, you need to flip witnesses, basically. We can't quite do that, but we do need to try and get to the people who were in the room when these deals were being hatched, and try to get them to explain it to you. Something that we've experienced in South Africa is also kind of persistence in the storytelling, in setting the agenda. So the Gupta stories were always financial. We started them in 2010, and these are the lead balloons that McKune was talking about. People they were just too complicated. Why should we care? But we judged that our news judgment was good, and we persisted. And by 2015, it was top of the news agenda. By this year, it was a raging storm, and the South African readers were hungrily reading our long, tedious forensic detail that we were writing and publishing for them. 5,000, 6,000 words, 3,000 words, often too long, but it had made it onto the news agenda, and people's tolerance for the detail grew. You must empower yourself, study, read, think critically, read academic work, study up on finance, economics, accounting. If you're not already, I studied botany, so I'm really coming in from nowhere on this stuff. But as you go, as you empower yourself, you develop your authoritative voice. You develop your experience. You learn to call something for what it is, if you can, or to at least recognize that something's wrong there, so that you know what the question is that needs to be stated if you can't answer it. And practice. This is a long game. The more years that you can immerse yourself in doing this kind of work, the better you're going to get at it. I probably went on a bit long there. Should I talk about security?
I think that it would be very interesting also to hear about security, because Craig also has litigation on his head. Although it's different from the country context of Syria, Craig also ended up being a target. So even though Craig insists that the whole thing is crap and they're going to win it, it says something about the challenges for journalism in general, So if you could say something about the challenges for journalists in your country when getting access to information or using that information, being in the public space.
Mm. So this is a question of risk, and what are the risks that what are the threats that you face, and what are the risks of these threats coming alive? And I was thinking coming in here that we're going to talk more about physical security, both for ourselves and our sources, but your legal risks are serious too. So I'm being sued by our taxman. The commissioner of the South African Revenue Service is suing me and my colleague Sam Sol personally, and the newspaper, the Mail and Guardian, for defamation. And he is also trying to get the court to order that we broke the Tax Act, which, if he got that order, would then pave the way for a criminal case against us, which is great fun. No, seriously, this stressed me out no end. I think it led to it helped precipitate a personal breakdown for me about a year or so ago. But I don't really know terribly what I can say about that. I think we covered our legal risk very well with that story. His case is unwinnable. Our public interest defense for exposing taxpayer information is strong. We even managed to get our finance minister to file an affidavit in our case, basically supporting our use of taxpayer information in the public interest. Of course, Zuma then fired that finance minister. But yeah, I'm not really sure how the legal risks gel with the physical risks. South Africa is not Syria or Turkey. We're not even Lesotho. We have been reporting without fear or favor for a very long time, and we come from a history where through apartheid, South African journalists many of them were very strong, and there was a very strong investigative culture that was built up, a very strong culture of speaking truth to power, and that has also been supported and has itself supported civil rights and civil action campaigns. And so, when we're in our running battles with people in power, our country supports us. And even though in the darkest days of the Zuma years, we felt very, very, very exposed. Sometimes, for example, when we were sitting on the Gupta leaks, trying to prepare it, we are sitting on information that could and ultimately did bring down a president, and that could and ultimately did bring global corporations to their knees. Really, it did. We're exposed when we're sitting there on our own. If the president has mobilized his spies, and he does do that and has done that to spy on us and knows what we're working on, we're at risk because we're putting him at a very serious risk. And we're sitting in a country that's violent. Until now, the police and other parts of the criminal justice system have not been on our side. Our government's been quite hostile to journalists. We have political killings of sort of local level politicians in various parts of our countries. We've had attacks on one or two journalists, one of which died, apparently as a result of the attacks. And we've had whistleblowers, including on the Gupta story, who've been attacked and tortured, and one of which died. And then another whistleblower on a different issue from that same province who was also, I think, also hijacked and tortured and died. And so we're not Syria, but we need to start taking our security seriously, and we have never really done it before. We don't have a security protocol like Lena does, because we're not driven by the same risks, but it's becoming something that we've realized that we need to take seriously, and we're working hard trying to put together a risk analysis for our own journalists, for our sources, and for our information, so we can carry on doing our work and try and do it smartly to mitigate against violence, but also against any kind of action that could subdue our journalism. So I don't have terribly much more to say on that for now, but I think watch the space and know that in many countries it's not an abstract issue. It's serious.